Chers collègues, il me revient d'ouvrir la dernière session qui, comme vous le savez, va porter sur, nous l'avons appelé, l'internationalisation de nos sociétés. Et donc, j'ai le très grand plaisir d'accueillir Daniel Chua, qui est le nouveau président depuis un an de la Société internationale de musicologie dans le milieu AMS. Je vais vous présenter Daniel Chua en français. And I say we are very happy to welcome you in France for this last session on internationalization, but I think you will context this word later. And Daniel Chua est docteur en musicologie de l'université de Cambridge. Il est professeur de musique à l'université de Hong Kong et directeur du département des humanités. Auparavant, il a été boursier puis directeur d'études à St. John's College à Cambridge, puis professeur de théorie musicale et d'analyse à King College, visiting senior research fellow à Yale pendant 2 ans, Henry Fellow à Harvard et research fellow à Cambridge. Il a reçu la Dent Medal de la Royal Musical Association en 2004 et ses nombreuses publications portent sur la musique, sur un spectre qui va de Monteverdi à Stravinsky. Il a notamment publié sur les Galitzine Quartets of Beethoven, Absolute Music and the Construction of Meaning and Beethoven and Freedom en 2017. Aujourd'hui, il nous présente, je pense en tant que représentant de cette Société internationale de musicologie, Global Musicology, Perspectives from Other Places. Je voudrais ajouter que Daniel est le premier président de l'IMS à ne pas être du Western World. Et donc, je crois qu'il faut le signaler.
Thank you very much for that very kind introduction. So, I know exactly what all of you are thinking right now. You are thinking, Isn't Daniel Chua too young to be president of IMS? Why did they elect a teenager to be the president? They did not have enough candidates or something? But let me assure you, first of all, that I am quite old. I am already past my half century. And if you want to know the secret of my youth, I will tell you if you remain awake after lunch for the rest of my talk. So that's a promise. So you can ask me afterwards if you want to know the secret. Now, so I am Daniel Chua. I really am the president of IMS, and it's a great honor to be here. I was obviously asked to be here as to represent the International Musicological Society. And at that time when I was asked, I thought I was going to share the platform with other speakers from all the other presidents from the other societies. So I'm a little bit I'm honored, but at the same time slightly embarrassed that I'm the only one speaking at this keynote, because I don't want to put the IMS on a particular pedestal. That's not the idea at all. In fact, I know that I've been kind of parachuted in from the outside. I'm speaking English to you, and I don't have any inside knowledge of French musicology. Now, I am fascinated with French things. I have written a little bit on Rameau and Rousseau, which is kind of French, I guess. And I also am very influenced by a lot of French philosophy. But I don't have any expertise on music societies in France and how they work and so on. So I would like you to see me as coming alongside you today. What I don't want you to do is to think I'm imposing any ideas from above or undermining you from below. I'm just coming alongside, side by side. So it'll help me feel better if you think of me in that kind of way. I'm also very humbled by the fact that you've been able to bring all these music societies together, because I realize that that's really, really difficult to do. And I think the fact that you are together probably says more, I think, than all that I can say today in my talk. So I want to congratulate all the organizers for putting this together. It really is an amazing thing. So, in this session on learned societies facing internationalization, I would like to share some thoughts on the idea of a global musicology. Now, these ideas are a result of me thinking about IMS and where I think IMS should be going. So these are theoretical thoughts based on very practical concerns that have been worrying me as the president, and I hope they're going to be of some help to you. So are you ready to begin now that you've all finished your lunch? So, global musicology, perspectives from other places. Now this is going to be a talk about definitions. In fact, there are only two definitions, really. What is the global? And secondly, what is musicology? Now, I should say that these definitions are not meant to be definitive. In fact, my definitions may be too black and white, too simple, too crude, too stereotypical. But I want to present them to you in the most basic, crudest form in order to stimulate some discussion later. So these are really hooks for you to hang your thoughts on. And we begin with the definition of the global. So what is the global? I think the global is best defined in contrast to two related terms: the international and the world. Now these three words here are often used interchangeably, and they often overlap. But today I want to use them to make three distinctive definitions about how music societies can relate to the wider world. And I want to use these words to differentiate ideas. So first on the list is the word international. IMS is international. It's in our name, International Musicological Society. So what does it mean? Now the word international was coined by Jeremy Bentham at the end of the 18th century. Actually, when the word was first published, the French didn't notice it at all because they were rather busy that year. It was 1789. But it didn't actually take very long for the word to seep into the French language, and the French adopted the word in 1801, so quite early on. Now, when it was formulated by Jeremy Bentham, it was used in a legal context. It was about the law. International law is the agreement between nations to share one law. International means many nations under one law. Similarly, IMS means many nations under one music. IMS was founded in 1927 as a way of uniting a fragmented Europe through music after the terrors of the First World War. And IMS was modeled after the League of Nations founded here in Paris in the Paris Peace Conference in 1920. So just as the League of Nations was many nations under one peace, so IMS is many nations under one music. Now, of course, this was in the day when there was one universal music. There was only one official music. And it was no accident that 1927, the year IMS was founded, marked the 100th anniversary of the death of Beethoven, the composer whose music transcends all earthly boundaries. Beethoven is the god of universal music. Now, the international is not necessarily global. It does not need to include the whole world. At the very minimum, to be international, you just need two nations to collaborate. Not every nation wants to collaborate. Not every nation can collaborate under one law or one piece or one music. And not every nation is worthy to be a member. But the more nations that collaborate under the single entity, the greater the progress of the world towards the universality of the uniting idea. The more nations that come under IMS, the greater the progress of the world towards the universality of musicology. So the model, really, for the international is one of integration. It is the law of one under which the many cooperate. Like Coca-Cola, it is one brand across the nations. The international is the same everywhere. Now let's look at the second word, the word world. Now the concept of world is the complete opposite of the international. The world is not about integrating different nations under one universal belief. It is about diversity and differentiation. World music is about the local, not the universal. It is not the same everywhere, it is about the different everywhere. The idea of world then requires a taxonomy of ethnic groups, each with their distinct beliefs and cultures. The concept of world is like a big encyclopedia. It is an attempt at an exhaustive list with different entries for each group ordered arbitrarily without hierarchy. In the world, you do not integrate these entries or group them around a center. You do not even need to connect these entries together. Instead, you just collect definitions. They just exist for their own sake, for you to compare and contrast. When you open the Encyclopedia of the World, you discover a static, taxonomic, relative space. In this space, the nations do not need to relate together because each ethnic group has its own integrity and identity. If the international is about the universal, the world is about particulars. The method of the world, then, is based on taxonomy and comparison. Now, to be extremely crude, the difference between the international and the world is like the difference between the old school musicology and old school ethnomusicology. Music as one culture and music as many cultures. And finally, we come to the word global. Global. Now, global is naturally about globalization. And globalization is characterized by the interconnectivity of the entire world. All the differences in the world form a single complex network. The global is a worldwide web pulsing with information. The global is the opposite of the world. It is not a static taxonomic space of distinct cultures. The global is a dynamic, fluctuating space, an unstable system of information and transformation that brings all cultures into relation. It is not about separate identities, but the relationship between identities. It is about encounters, entanglements, interaction, interpenetration, flows, and fusions. So unlike the international, the global has no uniting identity. Unlike the world, the global has no multiple identities. Instead, in the global, identities are formed through their interaction with difference. Let me give you an example. Let's take the idea of Western art music. Now, under the concept of the international, Western music is a universal law under which nations cooperate. Now, with the idea of the world, Western music is just one entity among many different musical cultures. Europe, Asia, America, and Africa exist on a flat surface, and Western music, if it is included, is just another object on that surface. With the global, Western music is defined in its relation to other cultures. In fact, it is entirely feasible to write a history of Western music without Western music. You don't even have to focus on Europe because Western music is part of a global ecology that is in constant flux. The West is as much about the East as it is about itself. Western music is full of foreign components. So you need to stand back and analyze the large processes that take place over long stretches of time and vast expanses of space to see the global forces at work. Now, the model for the global, then, is neither the integration of the international nor the taxonomy of the world. It is an ecology, a dynamic ecology of relations. Now, in the 21st century, IMS, my organization, needs to be global. Being international is no longer enough. So this is how IMS understands its name today. For us, international means global. We are a dynamic ecology of musicologists. So my question for the other societies here today is, what about you? As national societies seeking to find a role beyond your own borders, which model do you operate under at the moment, and which model do you want to adopt in the future? Interesting question. So that's my definition, my first definition, the global. And now I come to my second definition, musicology. So I want to define musicology now, or rather, I want to undefine musicology. Musicology is too defined. It's too refined with its subfields and its subdisciplines. I want to flatten all these categories and return to the basic meaning. Musicology is the study of music. Musicology is just the study of music. Now, I know that there are many disciplines of music represented here by different societies. In many parts of the world, these societies are a result of a complex history of division. In the past, musicology grew by a process of binary fission. Groups would divide and split off as independent cells. This is especially the case, as many of you know, in the United States, where the boundaries between historical musicology and ethnomusicology and music theory are like battle lines. The groups fight for ascendancy, for jobs, for students, for their own self-interest. There is no one term to unite all these factions. But I want to use the term musicology to unite us all. Of course, not in the old way. In the past, and sometimes today still, musicology is narrowly defined as historical and Western and only for art music. But as you can imagine, this is both exclusive and limited and now quite outdated. So this is why the term needs to be undefined and redefined. I'm just going to use the term musicology to cover all music in all the different ways it can be studied. Musicology is the study of all music in all the different ways it can be studied. Musicology is everything. So by musicology, I mean the study of music in its broadest sense: historical, theoretical, analytical, anthropological, ethnographical, physical, physiological, mechanical, digital, cognitive, psychological, philosophical, etc., etc. My use of musicology includes everything. And this is how IMS understands its name today. The musicological in IMS is a musicology of everything, a musicology without frontiers. Our journal, for example, Acta Musicologica, is edited by a historical musicologist and an ethnomusicologist, and we include articles on computing, on historical documents, and ethnographies, and so on. Now, this redefinition of musicology is a consequence of adopting a global perspective. If the global means that we are defined by our interconnectivity, then it also means that our musicological subfields and subdisciplines are interconnected and flow into each other from different points around the globe. Instead of growing by division, we need to grow by being in relation. Now, in this room, each society represented here has its national border and disciplinary border. If we want to be global and musicological, we need to cross these borders, which is why I'm sure why you're all meeting together today in this room. Now, we don't need to abolish these borders. It's not that everything is the same everywhere, but we do need to have open borders. Now, let me illustrate this by highlighting a recent project. 5 years ago, Reinhard Strohm, with the support of the International Balzan Foundation, initiated a project known as Towards a Global History of Music. The project started with a very basic problem. It was premised on a divide between historical musicology and ethnomusicology. To put it very bluntly, historical musicology, in its preoccupation with European music, does not attend to the world. Its history is geographically circumscribed. Ethnomusicology, on the other hand, intending to the ethnography of the world, has neglected history. Its global coverage lacks historical depth. Now, of course, this binary opposition is a stereotypical description of a situation that is more nuanced and peppered with admirable exceptions. Nonetheless, it outlines a reality that has rendered the study of music ineffective, spawning exclusive methodologies and approaches that are caught up in ideological and political assumptions and unconscious biases. Now, the moment you put the word global next to historical musicology, or the word history next to ethnomusicology, the difference that defines the two disciplines no longer makes sense. They kind of blur together. The border becomes porous. The two sides open up to allow different methods and cultures to flow through and redefine each other. All music has histories, and all music have ethnographies. So ethnomusicology acquires a historical scale, and historical musicology acquires a geographical scale. And these two axes create a dynamic flow of encounters and entanglements in which interactions over time and space define the object of study. With this interconnectivity, music becomes a more complex, three-dimensional object. And historical musicology and ethnomusicology are brought into a relation in which they can coexist and pass beyond each other's boundaries. Also, in this blurring, both disciplines lose their centers. Historical musicology is no longer Eurocentric, and ethnomusicology no longer has a single perspective for measuring difference, since local indigenous histories anchor the music of a region in their own perspectives. For example, is the study of Chinese music history ethnomusicology in China? Is the study of Chinese music history ethnomusicology in China? Chinese music is no less foreign in China than Western music is foreign in Europe. The point is, all music has ethnographical and historical dimensions. In one sense, this is all really very, very obvious. But the fact that this is obvious reveals the ideological fractures that underlie our practices. So let me be very blunt. Musicology is broken. It has fallen apart. Its parts do not connect. These inadequacies are not just evident between historical musicology and ethnomusicology, but also evident in every field. I am not sure if a global musicology will heal all these divisions, but it certainly highlights the major epistemological and ontological inadequacies behind our methods. And this points to another problem, a really big problem. If our ontology or our epistemology of music is inadequate, we have lost the foundation for what we do. Global musicology can't just happen. It needs to be grounded. It needs a foundation. So the term musicology is not going to be redefined as the study of music in a global context simply because the president of IMS declares it to be so. Right? Its definition is not going to change, as in current American politics, just because the president says it is true. In order to open our borders, musicology has to rewire and rethink itself. It has to be redefined at a fundamental level. And currently, this foundation does not exist. Work needs to be done. So let me illustrate this by looking at the problem of music theory and analysis today. Now, you would think that music theory should know what music is, right? By definition, music theory is about music. It theorizes music. But is music theory really about music? I want to make my point by examining an extreme case, a project launched by NASA in 1977, the Voyager space mission. Now, on the Voyager space probe, NASA placed what is known as the golden record on board as a message for aliens to find in the future. So you can actually see that this gold disc there, that is actually the golden record. Inside that is an LP of music. Now, even though it is a long-playing record, an LP, this object was really a very 1970s concept of personalized music. It was a mixed tape of humanity's greatest hits because the golden record had to represent the music of all humanity as a gift to possible alien life forms in a galaxy far, far away. So it's more like a mixtape. Now, by the time this mixtape arrives at the next star system, which will be at least 40,000 years' time, humanity may not even exist anymore. In fact, one day the golden record may be the only surviving artifact of human culture in the universe. So the stakes in compiling this mixed tape are very high. What is included and what is omitted speaks volumes. So let me first give you the very bad news. There is no French music on this disc. So the French will be forgotten when our planet implodes. Never mind. Now, of course, there are many other omissions and quite a bit of unconscious bias on this record. But actually, despite these problems, NASA's music compilation was way ahead of its time. So here's a picture of the outside of the record with all the instructions for aliens. So NASA's compilation was way ahead of its time because here on one disc, NASA brought together a collection of world music from different historical periods before the category of world music even existed commercially. Western and other musics, including the sound of nature, were mixed together in a manner which would be virtually indistinguishable to an unassuming alien with no cultural context of Earth. The record included 3 works by Bach, 2 by Beethoven. According to NASA, this is to allow aliens to do comparative music analysis. It's true, they said this. So 3 works by Bach, 2 by Beethoven, as well as music from other Western composers such as Mozart and Stravinsky. Popular music was represented by Louis Armstrong, Chuck Berry, and Blind Willie Johnson. There is music from ancient China, from Papua New Guinea, from the Solomon Islands, in many styles, from Mexican mariachi to Indian raga. NASA united what in 1977 was divided. In 1977, the warring factions between historical musicology, ethnomusicology, and music theory was already fermenting in America. Popular music studies did not exist, let alone one that recognized the contribution of black musicians. So in a way, NASA understood music more deeply than the musicological community. NASA had the bigger picture of humanity's music on this tiny little disc. Now, NASA did not send any music theory to go with the golden record. But if NASA had wanted to help the alien understand Earth music with some theory, what music theory would it send? Heinrich Schenker for Beethoven's Fifth Symphony? Some of Alan Ford's pitch class set theory for the Rite of Spring? Perhaps. But NASA probably figured out that there was no single theory capable of explaining the representative samples of music encoded on the disc. If Beethoven and Stravinsky already required different theoretical methods, what would a Pygmy Girl's initiation song from Zaire or panpipes from the Solomon Islands or Louis Armstrong and his Hot Sevens demand of music theory? Not only is theory inadequate to the task, it would become increasingly disparate if it attempted to explain the diverse music on the record, resulting in a massive proliferation of discrete techniques. A golden textbook in several volumes would have to accompany the golden record, and music theory would ultimately alienate the alien. So music theory should be responsible for all music. And yet, in its obsession with discrete techniques, it has not asked the ontological question necessary to determine what music is. Music theory fails as music theory because it defines music as that which its techniques are suited, and so misses out most music in the world. It has no basis, no ontology for the study of music. In other words, music theory isn't global. It doesn't even provide a basic theory that can unite all the disciplines within musicology. There is no shared theory among the societies represented here. Music theory cannot help us in that sense to relate to one another. So here's the fundamental problem. There is no fundamental theoretical basis for a global musicology. Our tools and concepts are broken. Now, this problem is not just a music theory problem. I just use this as an example. This is the case in all our music disciplines, because like theory, we have not asked the question, what is music? If you were given NASA's golden record as the basis for a research method, how would music history be written? What would ethnomusicology look like? What would media studies or sound studies be? And given the binary codes used by NASA and its various forms of data storage on the disk, how would music computing function? How would it communicate to aliens? Now, it is not the case that NASA got it right. It is just that when you are given the problem of representing the world on one small disk, you think very differently. This is the challenge of globalization and global musicology. It forces us to ask the question, what is Earth music? What is our music across all times, across all cultures, across all worlds? So let me be provocative again. Is it the case that musicology, in its inclusive sense, does not know what music is? Is it the case that musicology does not know what music is? You see, global musicology is not just some trendy idea that I'm suggesting. It's not something that we can just do as the next cool thing. Rather, it is asking us to return to some very basic questions about our ontologies, our identities, our practices, our assumptions. It shows us how broken musicology is and how much work needs to be done at a foundational level before we can relate to one another across disciplines and societies. So, having defined the two terms, the global and the musicological, let's talk a little bit about global musicology in general. And the first thing I want to say about global musicology is that it is very difficult to do. It's hard. It's really hard work. Global musicology is very hard. So here's a reality check. Global musicology sounds really nice to say, but it is very difficult to do. In theory, it's great. In practice, it's really tough. And here's why. Globalization has a long history. It's been happening in the world since at least the early modern period, in the age of exploration across seas, connecting different continents and cultures together. Now, of course, in the last 100 years or so, the process has accelerated exponentially, driven by the speed of technology. This is both a process of rapid expansion and rapid contraction. So globalization is this tension, expansion and contraction. The more you know, the smaller the global village. And so we've got to this stage where we can no longer handle this double movement. Our connectedness has made knowledge complex, way too complex. No one can be an expert of everything in all its diversity around the globe. A computer might be able to handle big data, but information is not the same as understanding. Today, no one can fully comprehend the cultural differences and nuances of an interconnected world. And this is happening in musicology. Musicology may not yet be global as a discipline, but musicologists are global. We are all over the world, educated and trained all over the world, from Paris to Bogota, from Boston to Tokyo, from Hong Kong to Paris. We are constantly moving and crossing borders. In this sense, musicology is already global because globalization happens to people. This is why musicology as a discipline has to catch up with its own community. And this is the big tension facing IMS. Our members are global, but our discipline is not quite global yet. To give global musicology, this gives global musicology a very strange time dimension. Global musicology is both now as people and not yet as a discipline. It is both where we are and where we need to go. But if the state of musicology is becoming increasingly global, then we need to accept the fact that it is becoming too complicated to understand. As with other aspects of globalization, there is a double movement of contraction and expansion. A globalized musicology is both too densely connected and too diffuse to grasp. The outward and inward tension is a dilemma. And many musicological practices are paralyzed between the two opposing forces, unable to move. On the one hand, the expansion of knowledge means that we can no longer be in control of what we know. We feel lost. And on the other hand, the contraction of communication means that we are connected to the world at high speed, but there is no way we can coordinate this dense network. We feel trapped. Oops, let me just get back to that spider. We feel trapped, like an insect caught in the world wide web of the globalization spider. We're connected to a world we don't know, and it's very overwhelming. And there are two basic and very natural reactions to this. We can either embrace globalization or we can withdraw from globalization. So let me talk about these two reactions. First, withdraw. It's a very natural reaction to withdraw. In fact, very often it is not even a conscious decision. It is not that we deliberately pull back. We just stand still and let the world move on. We withdraw into what we know and disconnect ourselves from the wider world of increasing confusion. It is much safer. We focus on what we do well with like-minded people. And this is the basis of most music societies. We focus on what we do well with like-minded people. Now, if scholarship is about pursuing our own narrow interests and forming societies around these interests, what happens is an atomization of musicology. Musicology will look like disconnected points. We would have the endless formations of different societies. But this is not necessarily a bad thing. It can be very good. In fact, it can be excellent. We can focus on what we do well with like-minded people, and very good research and very high professional standards can be achieved in this way. And IMS can be exactly like this. We could be, indeed, maybe we have been, a model like this because we only have to be international. We don't have to be global, if you remember. This means that as long as scholars in the UK and the US are in collaboration, we are international. This means that as long as the French and German musicologists are talking together, we would have accomplished our mission of furthering research through international collaboration. There is one common currency, that is historical musicology, through which we can trade knowledge. In this model, we can withdraw and control the currency we know. We disconnect from the world and just work with our trading partners. We share the same currency. IMS will have a strong and efficient professional identity, working in 5 official European languages, focused on historical musicology in the Western tradition. This could be IMS. And my job would be really easy because we would just be doing what we've always done. But there are 2 problems. The first problem is that we would be irrelevant because international collaboration is what the best scholars do anyway. You don't need IMS to connect French scholarship with the British scholarship even after Brexit. Scholarship is always international. Universities are internationalizing all the time. Modern technology just makes this easier. We don't need a music society to mediate scholars internationally. IMS would just be replicating what is already happening. It would be redundant. It would be irrelevant. And the second problem is this. It would be disconnected from reality. The withdrawal model no longer reflects the world we live in. And this is a problem for both international and national societies, because globalization is not just global. Globalization is also local. There are very few homogeneous societies today. Cultures and people groups are mixing and colliding right in front of our eyes. Now, just look at me. Here I am. See, I am really 19, right? Now, I am from a very small place called Hong Kong. It has 7 million people, of which only about 30 are musicologists. I'm not even a citizen of Hong Kong. I'm actually a British citizen. I'm ethnically Chinese, but I was born in Malaysia and lived in Singapore and America before I settled in the UK at the age of 6. I was educated in the West, and I now teach in a former British colony under the rule of China. I encourage local culture to flourish in Hong Kong, and yet Hong Kong's biggest arts festival is called Le French May. And I work on German and Russian music using theoretical models from French philosophy, and I'm now speaking in English to eminent scholars in Paris. I am a living embodiment of globalization. I am a transaction of different parts of the world. I am a crossroads of transcultural flows. I'm always negotiating the tension between the global and the local. I'm always moving between cultures, interacting with different perspectives. Everywhere seems different. And I can tell you that musicology is not the same in Hong Kong as it is in France. It is not even the same in Asia between Hong Kong and Taiwan or Korea or Japan. And Hong Kong musicology is very, very different from that in mainland China, which is just right next door to us. We belong to the same country, actually. And yet, we're all mixed together in a global village that is getting smaller every day. And in this mix, what we define as musicology are not discrete units. Our differences are a result of complex histories and ethnographies of encounters and entanglements and relations. The entanglement between Japan and Germany produces a distinct musicology, as does the entanglement between Taiwan and Japan, or Hong Kong and Britain, or South Korea and America. It's all interconnected. And of course, musicology in France is also highly distinctive with its own set of global interactions. Now, if IMS is not global, then it does not reflect the reality of the world we live in. This would make IMS not only irrelevant, but ignorant. IMS would not be able to engage with the new reality, and worse still, it would just look out of date and be misunderstood as the leftover of some colonial or Eurocentric mindset, which was never, ever the intention or vision of IMS. And this is the same problem facing national societies, because the national has changed as a result of globalization. The global village is not just the whole world, it is also in Paris. If national societies want to engage in current issues, then they have to negotiate the global. So this is the first reaction to globalization: withdraw. Ignoring global musicology does not make us bad musicologists, but it can make us irrelevant and out of touch, if not out of date. Second, embrace. That's so pretty. The second reaction is the opposite. We embrace globalization. It's great to celebrate diversity. What could be more worthy than embracing the whole world? Of course, we should welcome global musicology and give it a huge, huge hug. Well, that's all very nice, to have these nice, warm, fuzzy feelings about humanity. But what is the reality of making such a decision? What is the reality? To embrace the globe means we have to lose control. And that is actually very scary. Because being in control is what we do as music societies. It's part of our professional identity. As societies, we are at the center of control. We define parameters, we set the standards, and shape the discipline. But a global vision makes this impossible because it's too fluid, too decentered, too complex. Now, for many years, our scholarship has to some extent been determined by taste. Our specialists, as experts, as scholars, we have discriminate taste. We narrow down what is good. That discrimination allows us to set the boundaries of control. But globalization requires us to adopt an indiscriminate taste. We need to be wonderfully indiscriminate about what music we study and what methods we use. We need to be indiscriminate about standards and measures because the globe is uneven. What is cutting-edge musicology in America may mean nothing in China. A critical approach in Europe may be inappropriate in parts of the world that are still trying to form and legitimize their canons. To be indiscriminate means you have to be global and local at the same time and lose central control. Now, let me give you a very mundane example from IMS. Now, when IMS started in 1927, music was defined as European. So what language should musicology be written in? Now, the British, as we know from Brexit, were never really European, and besides, it didn't have any good music, so English was not adopted. In the beginning, the official languages of IMS elected to represent European music were German and French. And it was only after the Second World War that English was included as the third official language in 1949. In 1956, Italian and Spanish were added. So IMS has now 5 official languages: French, German, English, Spanish, Italian. We, IMS, define music, and therefore we control the language for musicology. That's why these 5 languages are known as official languages. Now, at that time, I'm not sure if IMS was aware of the colonial overtones, because having 5 languages was regarded as very progressive at a time when Latin was the scholarly lingua franca. Between 1928 to 1955, congresses and publications could still be delivered in Latin in the IMS. And even today, our journal, Acta Musicologica, uses Latin to describe its title and governance structure. So having 5 living languages sounded really modern compared to dead Latin. We were international, and international, if you recall, means different countries working in collaboration, and 5 languages working together was cutting-edge stuff. But as musicology becomes global, it expands the definition of music. And this logic demands that you increase the number of official languages. Why not Portuguese? There are many musicologists writing in Portuguese, not just in Portugal, but in Brazil. Or Korean. Did you know there are over 40 music journals written in Korea? Or Japanese. Japan has a massive, really massive musicological community. The international has become global. You can no longer be in control of language, and IMS no longer has a right to determine the official languages of musicology today. So what should we do? What would you do? Well, there are normally just 2 solutions. Either you have one language, as they do in most of the sciences, English, or you accept all languages, right? Actually, there is a third solution. You do both, in order to acknowledge the global and the local simultaneously. And this is what IMS has decided to do. We have decided that English will be our official administrative language, but that there will be no official languages for musicology. In the future, the languages for IMS events will be determined locally by the event organizers. They may decide that since this is a regional meeting in Latin America, the conference will be held in Spanish and Portuguese. Or some may decide that this is an international conference, and so everything will be conducted in English. In order to be global and local at the same time, we had to give up some control. Instead of a centrally organized system, we needed to create relationships and networks where decisions are distributed across the organization elsewhere. So what you see happening here with languages actually happens in all other areas of musicology. The themes, the methods, the standards, the formats, they all need to undergo this change. You see, once IMS becomes global, we have to descend to the organization. Now, I am the first, as we mentioned, I'm the first non-European president. Our last Congress was located for the first time in Asia, in Tokyo. And suddenly, these shifts changed the entire perspective of musicology. And this was achieved by the past president, Dinko Fabry, who is here, who did an amazing change in changing the way IMS looked. But Asia, of course, is not the only perspective here. So let me show you what I mean. Imagine that this is a globe, all right? This is a globe. This is actually my lantern, but it's a globe. So how do you represent the world? You can't, because the only legitimate center of our globe is at its core, which is both inaccessible and uninhabitable. No one is at the center. We all live on the surface, on a curved surface where there is no still point from which we can be either positionless or claim to have some kind of equidistant neutrality. Each position on the globe gives a different viewpoint, a different story, a different standard, different interests, different canons. How many positions are there in the world? An infinite number. And having no position is equivalent to having infinite positions. So not only is there no position from which to grasp the totality of the world, the totality itself is ungraspable. So how do we represent the globe? Let me just put it back on the floor. Hang on. If there's no position from which to even answer this question, then the only answer is that we need to be in relation. We need to drop the model of the academic as the lone ranger and adopt a collective model founded on what I would call a difference in relation. This can only happen if a society of people from across the globe gather together for the purpose of looking to the interest of its other members. A society of people gather from across the world to look to the in the interest. No, sorry, let me do that again. This can only happen if a society of people from across the globe gather together for the purpose of looking to the interest of its other members. IMS should be such a society. In other words, we have to change the model of a society defined as like-minded groups of people looking at their own interests to one where people of different minds look to the interests of others. So having made various shocking comments such as musicology is broken and musicology does not know what music is, let me give you one final shocking comment. Musicology is really about love. Musicology is about love. Now, I know this sounds really banal and sentimental, yet this is the language we use to describe academia. Why do we have colleges? Because we want to be collegial. Why do we call our colleagues fellows? Because we want to be in fellowship with them. Why is IMS a society? Because we are committed to each other. We use the language of love in academia. And in musicology, it is not just the love of music that binds us. We need to love each other's differences. The love of the scholar as the other, that might just begin to provide a glimpse into the possible representation of a global musicology. And if we can bring together scholars from as many different positions as possible, then we might begin to live out in concrete ways a global musicology and work out how to express this in a scholarship that is inclusive, indiscriminate, and diverse. This is the vision of IMS. And I hope that it is a vision that inspires you, or at least stimulates you to think about yourselves as learned societies facing internationalization. Thank you very much.